Okay, well, welcome everybody to the webinar today. I'm Donna Lucas from RMCG, and joining me today is Steph Carstairs from Planfarm, who's the project manager, and also Jake Gordian, who is one of our consultants and data collectors. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're all meeting on today, and I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm joining from Nipaluna, Hobart, in Tasmania, and I know that we've got people joining from right across the country today. So the purpose of today is to describe the Level Up Hort project and what's involved, but also probably what you're looking forward to is a summary of the year 2 results from the 2024 season. There'll also be some time for questions and answers, and we'll share some stories as well about some of the benefits and some of the feedback that we've received so far. So use the Q&A function that should be at the bottom of your screen as we go, so you can enter in your questions, and Steph will keep an eye on those questions as we go. And just a reminder that we are recording the session today. So Level Up Hort, it's a 5-year project. It's funded by Hort Innovation. It's funded through Hort Innovation and using the vegetable and onion levies. So it's available to any onion or vegetable grower. There's 2 main parts from our perspective to the project. One is the work we do with individual businesses, so working one-on-one with businesses to analyse their business. And the second part is the national benchmarks that fall out of that work, which is the benchmarks that we'll share with you today, some of the data. It's delivered by Planfarm in partnership with RMCG. So Planfarm look after mainly the Western regions, so Western Australia, South Australia, Northern Territory and North Queensland. And RMCG looks after mainly the eastern states, but also southeast Queensland. So in terms of what's involved, the reports that the grower participants receive are confidential to that business. So nobody else sees those reports. They get the one-on-one consultation with one of our consultants, and they get a business analysis report, which does a deep dive into their business, and it provides a lot more detail than what we provide in the national reports, the national benchmarks. The second report that they get is an individual benchmark report, and that's where they can compare their own data with the average and against the industry data. In terms of the benefits that some of the growers are seeing, there's increased financial literacy skills, and they've also got a better understanding of where they might be able to focus in their business. But we'll talk a bit more about benefits later on. And I guess the other thing which I mentioned earlier is the benchmark reports that are published each year. So we've got 2 of those now, and they're a guide, I guess, for industry. And we only focus on reporting averages, aggregated data, and it's all reported on a dollars per hectare basis, so that there's no way that any individual farm business data can be identified. So if we have a look at the summary of the data for year 2 for 2024, so on average, this is across the whole data set. The income was just over $61,000 per hectare. The costs were just over $57,000 per hectare, and the EBIT, which is the earnings before interest and tax, was $4,200 per hectare. The EBIT margin was 7%, so that means 7% of the income was remaining after paying operating costs. So that's the amount that you've got left to cover your finance costs, so things like interest and lease payments, as well as tax and potentially reinvesting in the business. So that EBIT margin on average was 7%, and we generally have a target of about 15%. The return on assets were 2%, and we have a general target of 8% for return on assets. So that's the average overall across the whole data set, but it's quite variable across the whole data set. And if we have a look at the most profitable group, this is the average of the most profitable 25% of participants. And you can see that their income was almost twice the average. Their costs were higher than average, about 1/3 higher than the average costs per hectare. Their EBIT was 4 times higher than average, and the EBIT margin was 20%. That was 3 times higher than the overall average. Their return on assets was 8%, which is 4 times higher than the average. So with an EBIT margin of 20%, that means that they're making a good profit and they can comfortably pay for their finance costs and have enough to reinvest in the business. The least profitable group, so again, this is the average of the least profitable 25% of participants. On average, they were making a loss. So you can see there's a negative EBIT margin there of 23% and a negative return on assets of -5%. So you might be asking, well, how do these numbers compare to year one, to the 2023 season? So I just wanted to highlight, first of all, that the two reports, the data in those reports, we can't compare directly because we had different participants in each year, and we had substantially more participants in 2024. So it means that we can't compare those two data sets directly. But what we did do was we pulled out a subset of the data looking at those businesses that were in both years. Now, this is a small data set, so we have to be careful not to draw too much from it. But the EBIT margin in year one was 2%, and in year two it was -1%. The return on assets in year one was 3%, and in year two was 1%. So while it's a small data set and we have to be careful what we draw from that, it is consistent with what we're hearing when we're talking with growers about increasing costs and also price pressure. There's a bit more information about that in the national report, where you can read a bit more about how we've described that. So just to recap on some of that, the return on assets managed for the most profitable group was 8%, and we have a target of 8%. On average, though, it was 2%, and the least profitable group were making a loss. So when you're achieving return on assets of 8% or above that, it means that you're making enough profit to cover your finance costs, but also reinvest in the business, which means it enables you to grow the business. So having a look at some of the costs, these are the main cost groupings or cost categories that we've used. And there's no surprise that labour is by far the largest cost. The other group of costs that are second, I guess, is production costs, followed by cost of sales. So production costs includes things like chemicals and fertiliser, and cost of sales includes things like packaging and vegetable cartage. When we looked at the most profitable group of businesses, and it's similar, I guess, on average, the individual cost items that are the highest costs are labour, and these are in order. It's labour, seed and seedlings, vegetable cartage, fertiliser, packing and materials, and chemicals. So they're the 6 highest costs that we've got, and they're the same as last year. So in both years, those 6 line items were the highest costs. And there's more detail on all of these and the other costs in the national report. So when we're looking at managing costs, I guess we look at where are the biggest costs, so where can we focus our efforts? And generally, we're looking at maximising efficiency. And it's not necessarily about cutting costs, although there might be some costs that need to be trimmed down in some cases, but it's more around managing costs and how to get the best bang for your buck out of where you're investing your resources. And I guess labour is one that's a case in point. So if you have a look at the graph here, and if you look at the most profitable group, they're spending more dollars per hectare on labour, but because they're generating more income, labour is a similar percentage of their income. So they're not necessarily spending less, but what they are spending is generating more income. So I guess the message there is about maximising efficiency, looking at where you're spending labour that can help drive production and profitability rather than necessarily cutting costs. So that was a quick summary of the data. If we look at reflecting on the last 2 years and some of the feedback and what we've heard from growers and participants, they've got a better understanding of management versus tax financials, and they've got a better understanding of where they can focus in their business. Some people are using it for things like exploring diversification. So this is some of the actions that we're seeing on farm, and others are using it for consolidating different crops that they're growing, for example. Some growers are researching automation. We've seen some that have changed the way they record their data so that they can better monitor things as they go, especially as they go now calculating data or accumulating data over a number of years through the program. And it's worth noting there that participants in the program, there's a broad range of crops that they're growing. and we've got a broad range of different business sizes, from large, small, as well as medium, and they're from different regions all across the country. So it's a very broad range of participants that are involved. Some of the reasons that people get involved, it can vary from people who are really wanting to focus on increasing profitability. It might be wanting a fresh set of eyes to analyse their business. And for some people, it's been part of their data gathering as they work towards succession planning, for example. So there's been a wide range of reasons why people get involved. We've developed a range of case studies, and these are really stories about why these people have got involved in the program and what they're aiming to get out of the program. And these have all been published in the AusVeg Grower magazine. And you can look those up online or on our website. So a big shout out, I guess, to these growers for being willing to be case studies and be showcased in the magazine. And just as the key messages to wrap up, in terms of the data, what we've learnt from the last couple of years, it's important to maximise efficiencies and manage costs, not necessarily cut costs. So it's about driving production and driving profitability. In terms of where to focus your efforts, the benchmarks might highlight where your costs differ to the average. They might be lower or higher, or where your income is different. So that highlights where you might need to investigate further. It won't necessarily give you an answer or a result per se, but it just highlights where you might need to go and investigate a bit further. And we always talk with growers about focusing on the things that you can control. There are some things that we have less control over. And we also encourage our participants to set their own targets. So while we've got some targets in terms of return on assets or EBIT margin, set your own targets and your own benchmarks about how you'll achieve the targets that you're looking at achieving. And just to wrap up, the website, leveluphort.com.au, you can go to that website and download a copy of the national report, or submit an expression of interest form, and there's a range of other resources on that website as well. So we might just open up for Q&A, and I just might ask Steph to unmute and see if you've got any questions that have come through on the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Donna. There is one from Chi from Veg WA, and he has asked, what advice is there for the least profitable growers? And I think that question was asked when you had the EBIT figures up, Donna. I think, Chi, if I'll just have a go at answering it initially, it's more like on a case-by-case basis. There's not a blanket silver bullet for those businesses who are struggling. I think the value of this project is that one-on-one consulting that each grower does with a consultant, where they get the management report of their business. They're able to look in great detail at their business, and it's at the whole of business as well. So while these figures are vegetables, there might be other parts of their business that are performing well. They may also have strong equity in their business, and it might just be that they might have had a localised issue that year, where that could be drought, or it could be a flood, or it could be they had a couple of crops go belly up, which has caused them to have low production year and therefore a low income year. So it's there's no one blanket approach really. But what this program does do is highlight cost areas which might be much higher than average. So it gives the grower an idea of specific areas in their business that they could focus on to improve their production, to manage their production costs better, and areas where they could grow some income. I don't know if Donna or Jake would like to have another go at add anything to that.
No, I think I'd say the same thing. There's no one size fits all. You have to look at each business individually. And there have been some where they might have been hit by climatic events, whether it be floods or other events. The other thing that we don't take into account in this program is the increase in land and capital value that some growers see. We don't include that when we're analysing the business performance, but that's another I guess, aspect that some growers are looking at as well. But yeah, there's no one size fits all. It really depends on each individual case.
I would just add that it is, in terms of the individual grower review process, it is, we kind of look at, what are the reasons for perhaps profitability struggles in any given year. So we really do try and drill down into it as part of the individual grower service, rather than just providing a report and with the metrics and how they compare. So yeah, it's kind of a constant focus for us as part of the project.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Just one thing I might add too, there might be some crops where, if you're seeing a low harvestable yield or pack out quality, that's one example where there might be areas that a grower needs to investigate further. Or it could be around, enterprise analysis and analysing which crops are more profitable than others, but also needing to take into account, how they all fit into the rotation, because sometimes you might have one crop that's good in a rotation with your main cash crop. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's something we have seen come strongly through this year, isn't it? The second year in the program, in that some growers have actually made some decisions about their crop mix based on the levels of profitability of each crop line, just by understanding their costs a bit more and knowing, not that we do specific crop analysis, but as part of this project, but they've done that themselves and made some decisions about cutting out or looking further into those crop lines that aren't profitable, so that they're not contributing to further losses in their business. Hope that's answered that for you, Chi. Tom Bicknell has a question. Re-EBIT being lower year in YOY, which is, I think, year on year, is that right?
Year on year.
But being lower year on year for growers who took part in both years. What were the main costs behind that?
I couldn't say off the top of my head, because it's not necessarily the cost, it's also the income, and it's quite variable within that data set. So I don't think that I don't think we can really answer which costs it would have been that contributed to that in particular.
Yeah, I think to sort of second that is that, excuse me, each business is so uniquely different, and I think that we basically didn't go there and look at those aspects of the data. They would probably uniformly have those higher cost levels of those types, such as labour, etc. But yeah, you wouldn't, without drilling down into it in more detail, Tom, I don't think we could really give a solid answer on that one. Sorry.
Do we have any other questions, Steph? Or
Yep, there's a couple more. So here's another one from James. Was there any link between asset value and profitability? For example, a more developed property would return a higher EBIT.
not necessarily is the answer, I think, because if in the most profitable group we've got a wide range of different models, so not necessarily.
Yeah.
Again, it's only a relatively small data set still, so we have to be careful about drawing any conclusions about that. But I guess, generating more profit for your resources is the key.
Yeah, it's primarily around their ability to drive income, really, isn't it? And
Yep.
That's that income that determines that profit while managing your costs. Okay, there's one more question here. Another one from Chi. Have you seen the least profitable growers from the 23 data set make improvements in 24? I think that was quite mixed, Chi. Some moved in a more positive way, some stayed the same. I think in the seasonal comparison on page 13, I've just got it in front of me, I think does highlight that. So yeah, there was some movement, and it might be, say, 50-50 have moved up or down.
Yeah. And I think a majority, or at least half of those that were in the most profitable group stayed within that group, but also we've got to be a bit careful about whether you're in the most profitable group or not, because you might be at the top end that's just outside of that group. So I guess it's important to look at where you fit compared to others, but also important to benchmark against your own business as well.
Yes.
Yep. Another question that we often get asked is the most profitable group. What sets them apart? What are the characteristics of that group compared to others? And that's an interesting one, because what we find is it's not necessarily scale. I think scale is important, and it can be important if you don't have it. But scale is something where if you don't have an efficient business and you scale up, you can be multiplying that inefficiency or multiplying your losses. But what we see in that most profitable group, they have good management skills, and that's financial management, but also people management. They are willing to learn from others. They're often people who will, study other growers in Australia and or overseas. They're willing to innovate, which could be taking on board some large innovations, or it could be those small 1%ers chipping away. But I think the people management and the financial management skills is what sets them apart, and they really know what their cost of production is, and so they focus on that. I'm not sure if Steph or Jake have anything to add to that in terms of what are the characteristics of the most profitable group.
From my perspective, it's probably, as you said, Donna, just understanding cost of production. That's probably the key one that I've kind of noticed in terms of the growers that I've dealt with. The ones who are more across their numbers, across their income, across their costs, have generally been in that more profitable group. That's just kind of key traits that I've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see that across sectors as well, don't you? And it's often just the approach to management, and that can be learned and improved on. But generally, it's just the approach to the way they manage their business that makes them more successful in that profitability perspective. But that's, again, it's not everyone's main priority either in their business. So it's, again, being able to find that work-life balance, and that balance with the environment as well. There's just a comment here as well from Lauren, going back to Chi's question on the 23 to 24 seasonal comparison, to just add that those that were in the lower group may have made or have made changes from 23, but the impact hasn't been seen yet in 24, because sometimes improvement takes a few years to translate to the bottom line. So I think that's a good point. Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah, good point. The other question that we sometimes get asked, and this might be something that Jake can add to, is having different ways of recording data, and how do we deal with that? We do have tools where we make sure that all of the data is collected and collated so that it's consistent. But what we sometimes do is we find that if we have access to people's cash book, if we have online access to that, just read only, not able to enter, that means that it can help us with identifying any questions and streamline that as well.
Yeah, that has been a big improvement for us in this year of the program, in trying to, so obviously we're all about trying to include the correct costs in the correct year, because obviously there can be some income that comes in the next financial year and cost that may have been incurred in one financial year, but for instance, fert and seed that has been used in another. So yeah, I guess I'd just highlight that's a real big focus and source of time for us in the project, is trying to make sure that that's as accurate as possible for the data. And it is, it's something that is the growers that have been in the project for 2 years are getting better with in terms of providing that to us as well.
Donna, we've just had another question come through. I think it's a question. I think the question is about what is the yield variability with the lowest cost per hectare and the highest cost per hectare. We don't measure or report yield in this program. And that's mostly due to client privacy and being a relatively small data set. You may be able to identify growers as a result of that. So to respect the confidentiality. I'm just trying to decipher what the person's actually trying to ask.
We do, when we're working with individual growers, record and monitor things like yield, but that's not published in the national benchmark report. So we don't publish any data about individual crop lines.
Yeah. So I guess yield variability, if you're looking at the year in, year out data, you can certainly see that start to track over time if perhaps a business might be more, or a crop type might be more volatile. Then that, I guess adds to the risk profile of the business. And certainly consistent and high yields, and we've seen through the data that increasing your ability to produce a saleable yield certainly contributes and is a main driver of profitability in businesses, especially in vegetables. So that doesn't necessarily mean that would be low cost to produce. And I think we have seen, and you can see in the costs that Donna put up earlier, that the production costs for the more profitable growers is often higher per hectare. So that would be an indicator that, and we did see it 23 to 24 comparison, that 24 was a higher yielding year. So costs were higher because it was a higher yielding year. You've got more, more picking costs and more packing costs around that. So sorry, I'm not answering your question very well, but I'm not quite sure exactly what you're actually asking, but I don't know if that's, I hope that's answered it for you, but yeah.
Yeah, so we do look at that, but only with the individual business, not across the benchmarks.
And it's more of a year in, year out thing that we'd be looking at.
Yeah.
Yields.
In some cases, you might work with the grower and they identify that that's an area that they need to investigate further or want to improve, whether that be pack out percentages or saleable yield. Yep. So are there any other questions, Steph, through the Q&A?
No.
Okay. So I might just wrap up unless there was any other comments from Jake or Steph before we wrap up. No? Okay, I just wanted to, highlight that this is a really good opportunity for any growers who want to get involved. If you're not sure, just reach out and give us a call or submit an expression of interest form and we can have a chat to see whether it's something you might be interested in. But it's a really good opportunity for individual growers to have a service funded through the levies to analyse your business. And we've got 3 more years of data collection to go in the project, so it's a good time to get involved because you'll have those 3 years year on year. And on the screen, we've got a QR code there, which will take you to the website where you can register your details or find out more information. So on that note, I'd like to thank Steph and Jake and thank everybody for joining today, and feel free to reach out to us if you've got any other questions.